So this is an update on a topic that we brought up a couple of meetings ago, talking about accepted streets and private ways in town. As many of you know, we've been putting up signs to mark which ways are currently considered private ways in town, and the rest, of course, we consider accepted streets. I want to emphasize one thing, because this was the biggest question I got after that last meeting. We are not changing our plowing patterns. If we've been plowing your street in past years, we're plowing it again this year, whether it's accepted or not. That's not the intention of this exercise. We're not changing other than one very specific street, and we've met with those residents already many months ago, and we're not changing that. So don't worry, we'll be plowing. And there's actually a comment about that when we get to the end. Oh, wow! So I submitted this nice, plain text that some engineer like me would come up with, and somebody added nice pictures, so these are new. So where are we at? Was the first. So in 1906 or 1905, Plainville was created, and in 1906 we developed this map, and there were 39 streets that had been accepted by Rentham before Plainville was created, and that are continued as such, and they're described and referenced as being on the 1906 map, and they're backed up by records in Rentham, although some of the Rentham records are a little spotty for the old days. Since that time, we've accepted 97 more streets at various town meetings. Whether some were new developments, some were streets that had been built in previous dates. Whatever, we clearly accepted 97 streets more, and then we had 17 streets that were accepted conditionally, usually with some strings attached. And we'll get back to that on my future actions activity. So we think we have about 152 accepted streets in town. On the other hand, we have some others that are not. We have 8 streets in the Gusty development which were not accepted when the rest of the development was accepted. Not sure why. Pearl and Garfield and Grant and Park, for instance, were all accepted, but Laurel, Lynn, and Monroe and some of the others were not accepted. And it's not clear yet whether that was an oversight or whether there was some reasoning behind that. We have a couple streets, Dorothy Lane and Oak Ridge Drive, that we know were not accepted, that were built back in the late 80s. We are already in the process of preparing to accept those. We started that process last year. We're not able to complete it in time for the 23 town meeting, but hopefully we'll get it done for the 24 town meeting. Also discovered that 2 streets that we have currently labeled as private ways, Amvet Drive and Witherell Place, were actually accepted streets under different names. So I think Witherell Place was actually accepted as Pleasant Street Extension, and Amvet Drive was accepted in the 1955 town meeting as Oak Street. So we've got to look at those and figure out what paperwork we need to update and to get that taken care of. But I think those are going to be very shortly, probably either at or in time for the 2024 town meeting. We'll be accepting those officially under those names. And then we think there are 24 other private ways that we haven't been able to determine what the state of them is, but they're clearly not accepted by the town. So we have about 37 private ways. So that gives you an idea of the scope of the problem, or the scope of the situation, if you will. So we got some next steps that we want to consider. So the first thing we want to do is, excuse me, I shouldn't say first thing. First thing we could be doing, these are all potential next steps, and the select board is going to have to look at this early next year and kind of decide on priorities and as we follow through on these. But I think obviously completing our work on Oak Ridge Drive and Dorothy Lane to get those accepted, correcting any documentation for situations like Amvet Drive and Witherell Place where there's really no work to be done other than maybe got to fix some documentation somewhere, to get those on our accepted list. We need to do some more digging to find out why some of those streets were left out of the Gusty development when the rest of the development was accepted. If there's a reason, or if it was just an oversight, or I don't really know yet. At some point, we should have somebody go through the records and see if the 16 streets that we accept at town meetings with conditions attached all actually had those conditions fulfilled. So we get our I's dotted and our T's crossed to make sure we're right there. And then I've got a list of a few streets that have been raised by citizens in the last couple of weeks that they'd like us to consider for potential acceptance as well. So we could start a process looking at those. I would caution anybody that it's a lengthy process. There are a lot of little legal details to take care of in terms of land ownership and easements and drainage and verifying the state of the road and et cetera. So any street that we start looking at now, we're probably, I'm going to guess we can process 2 or 3 streets a year. So anything we start looking at now is probably looking at a 25 town meeting kind of timeline. But it's been very interesting to dig through some of the old town meetings and see what some of the decisions were made, even though you can't quite get all the context, but it's been very informative. And I do want to thank, in a special way, Cindy Bush for the great research help she's been to me to provide lots of information on town meetings and find some things that were pretty obscure. Those are some of the things we're going to look at doing. There are a few twists, and people have asked some questions about their roads, like, well, if I'm on a private way, how come the town fixed it once? Or if, are you allowed to plow? Because those are legitimate questions where it's a private way. A private way is fundamentally a piece of property that's not owned by the town. It's not a whole lot different than somebody's driveway, except there's more than one house usually on it. So some things happened in town that we were able to research. In 1954 special town meeting, there was an article that specifically modified the bylaws to require that adequate drainage and streets were brought up to proper grade and proper surfacing done before they could be accepted. And that actually came into play at a later town meeting when somebody was trying to advocate for 2 other streets to be accepted, which are currently private ways. They in fact were not brought up to proper grade and surface, and on the advice of town council, those 2 streets were not acted upon back in the 60s. 1954 also, Article 2, there was a bylaw to allow water extensions in unaccepted streets at the expense of the owners of the property that are being serviced by that, which answered one of the questions somebody had, was, how could I have a private way? There's water on my street. Well, we actually passed a bylaw to allow that in 1954. In 64, the annual town meeting accepted some provisions, some parts of Chapter 40, and provisions in particular which allowed the town to have permission, not requirement, but a permission to do repairs on private ways if they'd been open to the public for at least 6 years or more without incurring any additional liability on account of any damage that we did while we were making the repairs, which I thought the 6-year thing was kind of funny, but odd, I should say, not funny. And another thing we did at the annual town election of 1994 is we accepted another provision of Chapter 40, which allows us to appropriate money for snow removal on private ways, which is how we get around the question of spending these 2 provisions of Chapter 40, or how we get around the requirement that would normally prohibit us from spending public money on private property. So those are some interesting little twists, and that's why that adds to the confusion. Unfortunately, by accepting the Chapter 40 proposals, we actually can spend money fixing roads, but because they're a Chapter 40 road, we can't go to the state and get any Chapter 90 funds to pay for it. And to go kind of full circle on this, one of the things driving this is we get a fair amount of money from the state right now called Chapter 90 funds, which pays for road maintenance. It's based on the number of miles of accepted streets we have. If we have only recorded, 50 miles, if we've only recorded half of our accepted streets is actually recorded up to the state, we're getting half the Chapter 90 money that we should be getting. And that's, that's not still not going to be enough money to maintain the roads as much as we want. But I sure would rather have the extra $200,000, $300,000 in the town coffers to help us. So it's important to get this right and get this done. We took a lot of years. You might say it took 118 years to get to the state we're in. With the streets, it's going to take us a few years to finish documenting and getting it to the state where we need it to be, but I think we need to keep pecking away at it. Anyway, so that's that's my update. I think, I apologize to the board, I meant to get that update to you by Friday. I did not finish it until today. I've also sent in a full list of the updated spreadsheet with the state of roads. It's actually, is it in there? You printed it already for them?
Yes.
Wow, okay, it's in your package. Sorry. Any questions?
So what's the normal process if there's a name change to a road? How should
I
that
don't know.
proceed?
It's a vote of the Board of Selectmen, and then
Yeah.
it's recorded in the road file. And the problem is it was not recorded in the road file.
Okay.
So I don't know when the name change occurred, and we could spend a lot of time
No.
doing it, or we just at some point,
Yeah, no, I was
You know,
more just, we don't wanna make the same mistake again.
No.
That's,
No.
that's
No.
what I'm trying to say.
the town clerk keeps a really good file of the road history. And some of the file folders don't have the kinds of things that we need, like who owns the land underneath the road? When did we record the deed? When did we accept the road? What was its origin and history? So a little confusing, because I kept telling him Witherall wasn't an accepted street, because we don't have a Witherall, but we did have a
Pleasant
Pleasant
Street
Street extension. But through his diligence and sleuthing, he was able to undermine this is what the problem was by looking at old maps and old files. And comparing the street file with the streets we have and finding the exceptions.
Okay.
I have no idea when or why Oak Street became Amvet Drive,
Right. No, that's.
but it's always been Amvet
Right, and
Drive
it
that
doesn't
I've known.
really,
Yeah,
it doesn't
so-
even really matter what
yeah.
happened. It's more just, we don't wanna make the same mistake
Right.
in the future. And
Right.
so then, just to summarize, if we accept these roads over the course of days, weeks, months, years,
Yeah.
the big change is the chapter 90 funding. Nothing changes in terms of the plowing or the maintenance or the,
Nothing changes in terms of plowing. In terms of maintenance, the difference, the private way we are legally allowed to repair, but not required to repair. I think as an accepted street, we have an actual, I think we have an actual requirement to repair.
gotcha, okay.
And then repaving
Yep.
is
Yep,
another
yep, yep.
question, because whether that's counted as repair or not is
Right,
an
okay,
open discussion. So anyway, I think it's just important to get them right.
yeah, okay.
And Brian, anything? Because this was such a big deal publicly, are there any questions from the crowd on this item? Mr. Wydeck? I'm shocked.
You're always gonna have one question from me, you should know that by now. On the accepted streets, do we have a mileage of exactly how much we have on the accepted streets? And do we have a mileage of how much we have of the unaccepted streets?
No, we don't have the mileage on unaccepted streets because we don't know them. The accepted streets at 72.3 miles, and of the 72.3 miles, only 46.87 are filed with Chapter 90.
So that means that's gonna increase to that amount. Okay.
That alone is more than a 50% addition to our chapter 1.
Exactly, and that's one thing that I wanted to make sure everybody is wary of, knowledgeable. Private ways, we don't have any idea how much, I mean,
We don't keep a record of the private ways except on the address file. It's not, other than noting it's an unaccepted way, we don't survey it, we don't measure it.
yeah.
It's not ours, we don't.
Okay, and so basically, do you think we have 200 people living on private ways, 500 people living on private ways, or 1,000 people living on private ways?
I'm sure that number could be ascertained, but I have not done it.
Thank you. Someday I will ask that question again.
I think you could take the town book and you could go ahead and calculate it yourself. And we'd be interested in your results.
Okay. Thank you.
We look forward to that report.
You will get one. Thank you, Mr. Kelly.
So once you're done with this project and you've identified roads you don't want to take, what does that mean to the town? And what does it mean to the people who live there?
I think, I'd flip your question on its head a tiny bit. I'd say
Okay.
our goal is to take a look at the streets that are not accepted and say, and identify ones which we really ought to accept.
Yeah.
And then to answer your question, which is the ones that are left after that, it's really up to the people who live on that. If they want to apply to be accepted, they can enter that process. It might, for some streets, it's gonna be an uphill process. And it probably won't ever go anywhere because of perhaps the way the street was designed, the way the street was built, the condition of the street. On the other hand, there may be streets that the residents can make a compelling case to say, we think it should be accepted, and we'll go ahead and do it. I mean, Oak Ridge and Dorothy Lane,
They were
there
built
were
to
some,
be accepted.
they were built to be accepted. There were some residents there who, well, some residents thought they already were accepted, but there were a couple who knew that weren't accepted and said, really, out of fairness, you gotta look at this process, and so we looked into it.
So you mentioned going back and identifying who owns these roads, right?
That's one of the steps if we're trying to determine the possibility of accepting it. One of the things you want to do, and frankly, I didn't mention Bacon Square, but Bacon Square is a prime example of that.
Yeah.
Bacon Square is on my list to check with Norfolk Register of Deeds in early January to find out who actually owns all the land underneath there, because I think it's possible Bacon Square is actually an accepted street, even though it's not recorded as such.
That's where I was going. When it was recorded as that property owner's land, it was the whole plot, right? For the whole big area.
Usually
And
would.
so how does that work, that it gets done? And so if they want their street accepted, because somewhere down the road, the thing crumbles and it's a dirt road, and
Right.
nobody wants that, and cars are passing through it, and the public, and they would have to go to the owner of the land
Right.
and sue them?
Well, they are probably the owner of the land. Most likely, their lot probably goes under the road.
So
That's
there's a chance
that's
that-
the typical, that would be the typical older case.
So there's a chance that this could never be resolved for some streets. And in the case of like Bacon Square, if it turns out that it's not an accepted street, and people cut through there all the time, and the road needs some serious work, that's a hazard to the whole town, not just the people on the street.
Yes, and I think in the case of a street such as Bacon Square,
Yeah.
we would look favorably on trying to have it become an accepted street. And that would be a process that would, and this is why the process takes a long time.
Yeah.
Identifying the landowners for the bits of the street and writing up the, deed transfers for those bits of property so the town ends up owning the street.
Right.
That would be the
What
general
if you don't
process.
want the street?
Pardon me?
What if you don't want the street because it needs too much work?
That's
And
what
it's-
town
and
meeting,
it's a
that's what
day-
town,
That's what I was
that's what
gonna
town
say.
meeting votes
It
are
I
for.
mean, theoretically,
Yeah.
couldn't you have a citizen's petition on a town meeting warrant and it
Yeah.
would be accepted that way?
Yeah, that's what happens,
Right, I
that's,
mean, I don't, I was
That's
just
what-
saying, if all else fails, I feel like that's,
yeah.
As long
No, but I'm
as
saying, what if the town says, hey, this road needs $200,000
So,
of
so
work?
just to
We
be
don't
clear,
want
I talked about a couple of streets that didn't make the grade in a town meeting in the 60s, 1964 annual town meeting, citizens petition to put these two streets forward as accepted streets, and it was shot down with no action taken because they didn't meet grade, and town council said, even if you vote to accept it, that's not gonna fly because you're in violation of the town bylaws, so the town meeting chose not to accept those streets. But if the town meeting body chose to accept a street, and that's why we take that vote at a town meeting, to instruct the select board to take all
But
necessary actions to accept a
I remember a
street.
meeting a year or two ago where you had thought
Yep.
that it would be stupid to take a street.
Yeah, there was one probably, probably,
It wasn't prepared.
Yeah.
To your satisfaction,
Mhm.
and how ultimately passed.
yeah.
But, so I understand all that part. I'm just saying, like, this could present a problem at some point, and how does that problem ever really get resolved?
If residents of Street A
Yeah,
own Street A
yeah,
and can't convince the town meeting body
right,
and the elected representatives of the town to accept it, town meeting says no, street A, they own that street, it's their problem.
Okay.
Just like, I mean, and that, the simplest way I can think of it is it's like an extended driveway.
Yeah.
You know, it's the driveway in your house, you own your driveway. It's up to you to decide if you want to pave it or let it crumble. I mean, it's not, that's kind of harsh, but that's
No,
kind of the way.
Like, I'm just wondering, like,
Yeah.
when it comes to a stalemate, when you're doing all this work,
Mhm.
so you kind of, you're dredging it up.
Yes.
And, it seems like it could get to the point where it's kind of a little stalemate here, and I'm just wondering,
It
you know,
could.
if it creates a danger for the public, how that gets in.
I would assume if it was truly a danger to the public and it was a road that was constantly traversed by many, many people throughout the day, that we would go ahead and repair it because we have the authority to do it under that master law that we accepted many years
Right.
ago. So that's, I can't promise that, but that would be my presumption, is that we would all be opposed to
That's
an
the way I-
obvious danger.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, but most private ways, probably, if they're in that condition, aren't getting lots of traffic. But you could end up there. I mean, but my biggest reason for starting this a few years ago was just that nobody knew whether they were on private ways or except streets, and we had such poor documentation of it. And so I fully believe that the first thing you need to do is, with a problem like this, is learn about it, confront it, and get the accurate information out there. So, anyway, thank you for the questions. You want to take the pavement management analysis update, or just
We
update
do have
us
a
that we've
draft
received the
pavement
draft?
analysis plan that has been submitted by Beta, and it is much more complete. And it added back the streets that we have determined were truly accepted streets and had not been included in previous pavement management analysis. So consequently, we have a much better plan, and as soon as we all get done reading it, we'll have the answers to some of the questions. But the most important thing is to coordinate the repair of our roads, so hopefully we don't make the mistake of paving a road and then digging it up a year later, which always makes us very popular. Each street is rated as to its condition and the estimated cost of bringing it up to snuff. And at the end of the process, they even give us an estimate of the cost of bringing all our streets up if I did it all at once, which of course wouldn't, because it's spread out over years. But we need about $10.9 million in road maintenance to bring all of our streets to A+ status. You really wouldn't do that, but as you go through the plan, you want to make sure that you never let your roads fail, and keep supporting it. You always want to try to spend a little money to keep your, move your C roads to B and your D roads to C, and never let an actual road go into default. But this is a good plan. It gives a guidance for the DPW to assign its priorities when we do spend our Chapter 90 money and the money the town meeting appropriates for road money. It tells us exactly where to spend the money for the greatest bang for the buck. I apologize, I think I have a question.
Yeah, I'm letting you finish, and then I'm gonna look for questions. Okay, another question?
Only because I really don't know. So if you have a major rehabilitation on a road, as suggested, how long would you expect that to last before you need another major rehabilitation?
Depends upon the traffic on the road.
Okay. Okay, I don't know, I gotta spend a little more time looking at this.
Yeah.
I guess what struck me, quite honestly, if I'm being completely honest, is that my street is not that old, and it's not that large, and it's calling for a major rehabilitation. And that struck me as odd, and it made me wonder, how long should it last, how long should a road last?
Well, if the road was constructed properly in the first place, and the base of the road was fine, your road, for example, should last 25 years. But if the base was not established correctly, then we'd have to rip it up, which probably is what, I haven't actually looked at your road
Yeah,
here.
I mean,
but
well, obviously. it's
replace
flip
the base from the ground up and replace it so that the road would last substantial amounts of time.
So-
But the wear and tear on a road is rated by its age, the environment that it's
Yeah.
in, the water table, the base, the traffic, particularly heavy traffic.
Yeah,
So for example, South Street is gonna wear out faster than,
makes
you
sense.
know, Bugby.
Right, yeah, that makes sense. All right,
But
well, I
all
gotta-
those carpet trucks on Bugby, you know.
And how old do you think your street is?
Well, it's 2000, so it's 23 years.
Was
old.
it 2000?
So about 25 years.
Yeah, that's
So
all.
it's
It
older than
just
you
struck
think.
me as, it surprised me, that's, I guess, it just surprised me.
What surprises me and what bothers me is the cost. Wow.
Well, didn't surprise me, but does bother me. It's a big investment. Anything, Mark? Okay. So this gives us a place to move on to for next year's work, because we'll be doing a fair amount next year, I think.